Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and I'm going to share with you the 5 conversations framework. And I'm well aware that some of you may not know anything about it, so I'll start from scratch, but I'll just give you a quick overview in our short time together. And if you need more information, obviously you can contact me. But let me start by sharing my screen. And for those of you who don't know me, there's a quick introduction to who I am. I run workshops, keynote addresses, I run executive coaching programs, and you can see up in the top corner, I play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. And you can see that fellow chasing me. You'd be running fast too if they were chasing you. So we want to talk very much about this concept of the 5 conversations framework. Now, an obvious objection or a question that you might have straight off the bat is, why is this better than others? There's been a very strong movement over the last, decade actually, where organisations are moving away from their performance review and looking very much at that ongoing everyday, or not every day, but constant, conversation. So check-ins, we might call them check-ins, where managers would sit down once a month, perhaps with their staff, and they would talk about a range of performance and development matters. Now, I think the reason why this is a far better approach is that I actually introduced it as a reason to actually replace the performance review, and many organisations around the world have done that, which I'm pleased to say, and they're getting fantastic results. But I'm aware that many organisations don't feel comfortable letting go of the performance review for whatever reason. And as a result of that, this is a wonderful enabler. This will actually create excellent conversations so that when you have your performance review, it'll actually be a lot more effective, because a lot of the issues have been discussed up to the performance review. So you can use it either as a replacement for the performance review, or if your organisation isn't ready for that, then you can use it as a check-in mechanism. Because obviously when we sit down and we have check-ins with our team members, the question that arises is, what do we talk about? Now, if we've got nothing to talk about, what will actually end up happening is we'll just talk about the job in hand or what the project is that we're working on. So I want to talk about it from both perspectives today and give you a quick overview as to what it looks like. So yes, I'm going to give you an idea of what the 5 conversations framework looks like. What are these 5 conversations I'm suggesting that you have? What's the process for implementing it in your organisation if you choose to go down that road? And at the end of this, I have a special offer for you because you've taken time out in your busy schedule on a Friday to come and have a listen to what I have to say, and I appreciate that. All right, so let's launch into it, and let's actually have a look at what the 5 conversations framework is. Now, what you're seeing in front of you here is the 5 conversations framework. So let me just give you a sense of the structure of it, and then what I'll do is I'll spend a little bit of time talking about each of the conversations. Now, this comes out of my latest book, The End of the Human, I'll start again. This comes out of my book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. And one of the chapters in the book goes into this in great detail. And obviously you can find out more about it by purchasing the book. Now, you'll notice over on the left-hand side, there is 5 months. And you might say, well, why is there 5 months? Well, I just think these 5 conversations are critically important. And the fact of the matter is, we probably don't talk about these in the performance review. We're too busy rating people. We're too busy looking at key performance indicators. We don't really get a chance to talk about these things. So I think these are critically important to anyone's development in an organisation. So that's why there are 5 conversations. And what I suggest is that any organisation I'm working with, what they do is, after they've gone through one round of the 5 conversations, which obviously takes 5 months, The next step is to maybe have a break of a month or two and then go through the conversations again. So what that basically means is that everyone in the organization is either on the receiving end or administering the 5 conversations 10 times a year. Now, just think about this for a moment. Think about your own organization, wherever you might work, and just think what might happen in terms of engagement, morale, job satisfaction, performance, development, if every manager, every leader in your organization was dedicated to having 10, 20-minute conversations a year with their team members. Now, each of these conversations are designed to be 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most. And I'm conscious of the fact that we're all busy, and people may certainly rail against this and say, well, I just don't have time for all these conversations. Well, they're pretty, once a month having a 20 to 30 minute conversation with your direct reports each month is not too much of an ask in my view. And I can assure you it'll make enormous difference. And one of the things I talk about in the book is some of the data that comes out of organizations which show clearly evidence of enormous engagement that's come from the 5 conversations framework. So we actually know it works extremely well. And so we've got evidence of that. So, and you can see that in the middle, you've got the theme. So you've got climate review conversation, strengths and talents conversation, opportunities for growth conversation, learning and development conversation, and innovation and continuous improvement conversation. And what you see in the column on the right-hand side is the content of those conversations. So that's an overview of how it works. And what we do is there's an order there for those conversations that I think is designed, which I'll explain to you in a moment, which really does maximize performance and development. Now, I've had some feedback that some organizations or managers in organizations say that I'm having regular conversations with my people anyway. But I wonder what those conversations are about. I'm sure a lot of them are work related, and I'd expect that you'd be having those conversations anyway. So this isn't, you'd be expected to continue to do that. But what about on the development and the performance side? Do you actually sit down on a regular basis and have development and performance conversations with your team members? Lots of managers don't do that. And if you actually think about it, if we looked at conversations in the world of work, there are 2 types of conversations. There are task conversations, which are obviously about getting the product or the service done. So that's one type of conversation. And I would suggest to you that about 80% of those conversations take place, or 80% of conversations are about the task. And then there's 20% of conversations, which I think is where this comes in, where we can bump up the opportunity for that. A good colleague of mine, Jim Kuzner, said that conversation or leadership is a relationship. And it's a great phrase. And the question is, how does one have a relationship with anyone? And the only possible answer to that is one conversation at a time. You can't do that by email. Not really. You can't do it via text. Not really. The only way that you can really develop a good working relationship up with each of the people that report to you is one conversation at a time. And this is exactly what this framework does. So let's have a look at the conversations and what should they entail. So you'll notice that the first conversation is the climate review conversation. And you might say, well, what's all that about? Organizations spend thousands of dollars, if not tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, having online engagement surveys. And what we're finding is that the participation rate in those surveys is getting less and less and less. And the reason for that is very simple. People just don't think it's going to make any difference to spend 40 minutes filling out a survey online. And so they elect not to do it. And of course, their complaint, and I think it's very valid, is that nothing really changes out of that data. It's usually shared, of course, with the executive leadership team, but very rarely is anything shared or anything changes. And my argument is, why don't we just have a conversation about it? Why do we have to go online and do it the way we do? Now, you might say, well, people aren't really going to be honest online. People aren't going to be honest face-to-face, but they might be online. I don't necessarily buy into that. I don't think people are necessarily dishonest either way. I think that when people sit down with people and have a conversation, if they can't be honest with their manager about their job satisfaction, what that would suggest to me is that it's an even more reason for them to sit down and have these regular conversations and catch-ups. Because obviously, if they're not, if they can't feel comfortable talking to their manager about these things, that would suggest that they need to do it. So what happens in the climate review conversation, which of course has nothing to do with the weather, is really the first question in the framework is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is high, 1 is low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, it doesn't really matter so much what the score is. It might be a 4 or a 6 or a 7, whatever it might be. The question, the follow-up question is why? Why did you rate it a 5? Why did you rate it a 6? Why did you rate it a 7? And then, of course, it opens up a really good, rich conversation about what people are noticing at work right now. And as we know, job satisfaction ebbs and flows, doesn't it? So obviously, 1 minute it's down, the next minute it's up, and basically over a period of time, it can change. So really, this is just a snapshot in time of where people are up to. So the number is really an opportunity to find out what they're thinking of, what they're concentrating on. I mean, you can have one bad interaction with a customer, an end user, a stakeholder, a client, and that, of course, can ruin your day. And if you're asked, you might rate it low, and the next day it might be up to where it should be. So once you've found out what that, what that rating is and why, the next question that you can ask is, do you think that it could possibly go from a 5 to a 6? Now, that's a good question, because for some people, a 5 is as good as it gets. They don't ever believe, regardless of what their workplace is like, that could it ever be as higher than what the score is that they've given you. So it's important, out of courtesy, to ask that question. And if, of course, the person says yes, in some cases they will, then the question is very much, well, what do I need to do, or what do we need to do, beyond paying you more, of course? What do we need to do to help you have a better job satisfaction? So this is a very easy conversation, and it's a very insightful one from my experience. And I think what happens is people really feel comfortable talking about these things if they're asked the right questions. But again, we don't talk about this in a performance review. So once we've got that conversation done, a month later, we go on to a strengths and talents conversation. And the reason we start with strengths and talents is that normally in a performance review, we usually go straight for the jugular. And what happens is we normally talk about what people aren't performing in. So what I suggest you do is you give people the questions before they start. So the idea is to give people questions. And of course, you get those questions in the book. And what that does is it helps them prepare for the conversation, because we want this to be an enjoyable and meaningful experience for both the manager and the direct report. So why not start with what people are good at rather than what they're not good at? So the first question that you ask in conversation 2 is, what's the one thing that you enjoy most about the work that you do? Now, we do know there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what people are good at. That's what the research tells us. So by asking people what they enjoy most in their work, you've pretty much unearthed their strength. And it's based on the 3P principle. We tend to practice what we prefer, and ultimately we become proficient in it. So by asking people what they enjoy doing is a great starting point, because obviously if you sat there and you said to someone, what's your strength? they may not feel comfortable responding to that. And then the next question, the follow-up question around that, once you've talked about that and they've given you some examples, is how you might better utilize that strength and talent in their current and future roles. So how might we, so for example, if somebody says they really enjoy the customer interaction and yet they're staring at a screen for 90% of their day, but they really enjoy that interaction with customers. So the question then might be, how can we give you more opportunity to do that? Now, quite obviously, that's not always possible because people are, you know, they're under the pump. They've got to get certain things done in certain times. But at least the conversation's had, and that means it can be parked. And later on, if and when that opportunity arises, then the manager can do something about it. And that increases engagement, increases job satisfaction. It increases effectiveness because people are working on their innate talent. And if they're working on their innate talent, they're likely to perform better doing that. This is what they often call job crafting, where people actually make small incremental changes to their job description so that they're doing the things that they are perhaps better at. And it certainly doesn't mean they've got to, you know, that they should be avoiding the things that they're not good at, that people are expected to do all of those things. So that's conversation 2. And then conversation 3 is an opportunities for growth conversation. Now that's around what people need to work on over the next 6 to 12 months. So again, you get the direct report to come to the conversation having thought about that. This is not about you sitting there evaluating them and suggesting an area for improvement. You actually want them to come to your conversation having thought about that. Now, of course, if they've thought about it and what they've said is something different to what you suggest, what you believe is an area of improvement, then of course you can mention that during the conversation. That's perfectly reasonable to do that. But allow the person, first of all, to come to the conversation with their own thoughts about that. And then obviously the idea of conversation 3 is very much around how you, as their manager, can assist them in that developmental opportunity. Now, conversation 4 is a learning and development conversation. And ultimately, when you think about it, you've had a conversation about someone's strength. You've had a conversation about someone's growth. We're now in a position where we can talk about bringing that together into some sort of a plan. It doesn't have to be a very formal plan, but it should be some sort of a plan. Now, this is what they normally call a training needs analysis in the world of work. We spend lots of time sending around forms, asking people to fill out what they want to do over the next 6 to 12 months. But learning and development is more than just sending people off to training courses. It's about coaching, it's about teaching people, it's about buddying people up with others. There's a bunch of things that can be done. And of course, the learning and development conversation is very much around getting a plan together for that purpose itself. And so whilst the learning and development conversation is very focused on the individual, the innovation and continuous improvement conversation, the last of the conversations in the framework, is really about the organisation and the workplace. So what conversation 5 is about is asking people to bring their brains to work, not leave them in a paper bag at the doorway, and to actually think about how they can improve their working environment. Again, we expect people to come to that conversation having thought about something that they can perhaps improve on or enhance. A lot of your direct reports believe that that's your job. Your job is to come up with those suggestions, but let's be clear about it. We've all got suggestions about how things can be improved. And if we tap into everybody's opinion about that, we're likely to get some good ideas come through. And then, of course, the idea is to implement those, to make those happen. Some of those things, of course, are easy to implement, such as putting a notice board up. Other things are a little more complex, and maybe some things aren't worthy of being considered after that's been discussed in this conversation. So you can imagine your organisation, imagine everyone sitting down, say in the month of July, having an innovation and continuous improvement conversation it's inevitable there's going to be some great ideas come out of that. So if some of those ideas are implemented, can you imagine the difference that that can make? It's significant. So there's the 5 conversations in a nutshell. As I said, 20 to 30 minutes per conversation. There are approximately 4 questions for each conversation. And the idea is that it's designed to be very effective. And let's face it, you can have a very ineffective conversation for an hour, and you can have a very effective conversation for 20 minutes. So this framework is designed to have a very effective conversation in a short, sharp 20-minute focus once a month. So there it is. That's the 5 conversations framework. So what I'd like to do now is just have a little talk about how you might implement it. So if you were looking at implementing this system in your workplace, what would you need to do? Well, you'll notice up the top, it says assess. So the very first step in the process is to actually assess the workplace. And I've got an instrument that does that. It's based on the 5 conversations. And what this does is it gives us a baseline. So we know where the organizational culture is. We know where people's engagement level is. And this is all done online, and it's a very simple process to do, but it brings out really useful information. So at least we've got a measure to start with. The next step, once we've done that, is we need to induct people. We need to explain, as I'm doing to you, why are we doing this? What are the benefits for you as a manager? What are the benefits for the people on the receiving end? So basically, people need to know that. Otherwise, of course, they won't realize the power of this. So people are inducted so that they understand, and that's not a long process, but it's an important one nevertheless. Then what happens is people are given coaching opportunities. And what I suggest there, and of course it depends on the size of your organization, but what we normally do there is get 4 managers together approximately 3 times throughout the first cycle of the 5 conversations. And for an hour and a half, we'll sit down and ask them how their conversations are going. So we use this as a peer group learning opportunity so people can start to learn from each other. So someone might, say how, someone might have trouble getting people to talk. And then other people are saying, well, try this, use silence, try that. So people are actually learning from each other, and it's a support process that can be very, very effective. Once a month, there's a 30-minute webinar online, similar to what we're doing now, which basically bookends each of the 5 conversations. So, for example, if you were starting the 5 conversations today, the first webinar would be a webinar on the climate review conversation, and the questions would be listed. There'd be some tips and hints on both the receiver of the conversation and the initiator. So to give people an opportunity to understand what's being asked. Then, of course, is the implementation, which is the real learning. A lot of people might go off to a one-day program on learning how to have conversations, but in my view, the best way to learn is to actually do. And if people are given this framework, I find that people learn enormously from this, both what works, what doesn't work. It strengthens that relationship between both the direct report and the manager. So it's an extremely important part of the process, of course. And then also some organizations like to use a recording system. So I've got an online web-based management support system that can allow people to go in and type their responses. And, you can click a button which sends an email to their manager to say that they're ready to have their conversation. The manager organizes the conversation, clicks another button that gives the manager a chance to go in and make some notes. So it's like keeping a record, if you like, of the conversations. And the last point there is we reassess. So remember before we did a snapshot of where the organization was. Well, we do it again after 1 round, and the results are remarkable, absolutely incredible in terms of engagement, in terms of morale, in terms of job satisfaction. All of these things have improved just through 5 conversations. I just don't have time to share all that data with you. But if you're interested, of course, get in contact with me and I'll certainly talk to you about those things. So folks, that's the 5 conversations framework. That's the system that we use. And of course, you can pick bits and pieces out of that, or you're welcome to just go ahead, obviously, and do it without any support system. But I warn you, it's not what might seem obvious isn't always the case. People actually need a lot of support for this to actually work effectively. So I make that point in the book. Okay, so moving on, you'd be aware, of course, that many of you would be aware, of course, that every week on Friday at this time, I always have a 30-minute snapshot of something that's interesting, useful, and hopefully practical for you. Next week, we've got improving performance through rethinking job design. And I think job design has held us back for a long period of time. And I want to talk about some very simple things that you can do to improve job design, including the job description, which will give people an opportunity to start building and job crafting, which is what I'm really talking about there. So you can see the date, next Friday, and there's the link. So I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording straight after this. And all you've got to do is click on that link and it'll take you in, and just like you did today, and you can register and you're involved. I did mention at the outset that there would be a special offer, and that's exactly what I want to offer you now. My book has just hit the marketplace, which I'm very excited about. There's been a lot of interest in it. The timing seems to be absolutely spot on. And I talk about 13 mindset shifts that are necessary for HR to unlock human potential. And, you know, if you go on Amazon now, you'd be paying approximately $46 plus postage. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, just shoot me an email by the close of business today, and I'll send you an invoice. And for $27 plus postage, you can get hold of that book, and that'll take you through all of the 13 different shifts that are necessary to bring up to speed HR for the future and post-COVID, of course. So that's it from me. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. So thanks, everyone. Hope you found that useful. And if you'd like to know more about the 5 conversations, send me an email. I'm more than happy to talk to you about how you might implement it in your organization. And thank you for joining today, and keep your eyes peeled, because there'll be an email which will have the slides and the recording that I'll send to you today for attending. Thanks, everyone. Wish you all the very best, and have a great weekend. Thank you and goodbye.